The silence in the grand ballroom wasn't one of reverence. It was the sharp, breathless hush that precedes a detonation. Hundreds of the city's elite, draped in diamonds and tailored suits, held their champagne flutes suspended in mid-air. All eyes were on the stage, where billionaire Alistair Williams had just finished a toast. But he hadn't toasted his wife Meredith, who stood beside him. He had toasted his mistress. And now, as the humiliation settled like a physical weight on her shoulders, Meredith reached for the microphone. Her hand didn't tremble. Her voice, when it came, was not a whisper of defeat, but the clear, cutting sound of a blade being drawn. The Williams residence in the heart of Mayfair was less a home and more a museum of a life Meredith Williams no longer felt she was living. It was a place of polished marble floors that echoed with loneliness and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a city she felt disconnected from. For 10 years, she had been the silent, steady architect of her husband Alistair's success. It was her sharp business acumen, inherited from her unassuming accountant father, that had helped turn Alistair's fledgling tech startup into the global behemoth Williams Innovations. She had been the one poring over contracts while he charmed investors, the one balancing budgets while he graced magazine covers. But in the last 2 years, something had shifted. The man who once called her his secret weapon now called her his social liability. Alistair, sculpted by expensive tailors and inflated by public adoration, had grown ashamed of her quiet nature and simple elegance. He craved a woman who was an accessory, a dazzling jewel to hang on his arm, not a partner who knew the company's foundational code better than he did. The upcoming Starlight Foundation Charity Gala was the focal point of Alistair's current obsession. It was the social event of the season, a night where fortunes were pledged and reputations were cemented. For weeks, the house had been a whirlwind of Alistair's preparations. Stylists, publicists, and event coordinators moved through the rooms like an invading army, their hushed, urgent conversations a constant reminder of Meredith's exclusion. "Meredith, for God's sake, are you really planning on wearing that?" Alistair's voice, sharp with disdain, cut through the quiet of her walk-in closet. She looked down at the dress. She held a timeless, elegant navy blue gown by a classic designer. "I thought it was understated," she replied, her voice soft. He scoffed, a sound that had become painfully familiar. He was already in his tuxedo, looking like a king, surveying a particularly disappointing part of his kingdom. "Understated is another word for forgettable. This is the Starlight Gala, not a PTA meeting. I need you to look impactful." He gestured vaguely. "I've had a few options from Valentino sent over. My assistant Isabella picked them out. She has an impeccable eye." The name landed like a stone in the pit of her stomach. Isabella Vance, the new executive assistant who had been hired 6 months ago. She was everything Meredith was not: vibrant, overtly ambitious, with a laugh that echoed in boardrooms and a scent of expensive Parisian perfume that lingered in Alistair's car. Meredith had tried to be welcoming, but Isabella had looked at her with an unnerving mixture of pity and triumph. Later that evening, while looking for a misplaced folder in Alistair's home office, Meredith found the first concrete piece of evidence. It was a credit card statement, carelessly left on the mahogany desk. Tucked between charges for 5-star restaurants she hadn't been to and flights to cities they hadn't visited together was a recurring charge that made her blood run cold: a monthly rental payment for a luxury apartment in Knightsbridge, an apartment Meredith had never seen, and next to it, a charge for a diamond necklace from a boutique called Elysian Jewels, purchased just last week. It certainly wasn't her anniversary. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was one thing to feel the emotional distance, to see the dismissive glances. It was another to hold the cold, hard proof of betrayal in her hands. The numbers on the page weren't just expenses. They were a detailed accounting of her marriage's slow and painful death. She remembered a conversation from a few nights ago. Alistair had come home late, smelling of that same Parisian perfume and a hint of champagne. He'd been distant, almost agitated. "Long day," she had asked, trying to keep her voice even. "You have no idea," he'd snapped. "Closing the Henderson deal. It's draining." But the Henderson deal had been closed last month. She knew because she had drafted the final terms. The lie was so blatant, so lazy, it was more insulting than the truth would have been. Now, with the statement in her hand, the lazy lie became a calculated deception. He wasn't just cheating. He was building a separate life, funded by the IPA she had helped him create. A quiet fury, cold and clear, began to replace the hollow ache in her chest. For years she had quietly endured his growing ego, telling herself it was the price of his success. She had faded into the background, allowing him to take all the credit, because she loved the man he had been and believed he was still in there somewhere. But this document told her that man was gone. In his place was a stranger who saw her as an obstacle, a relic of a past he was desperate to shed. The humiliation stung, but for the first time in a long time, Meredith felt a flicker of her old self, the sharp, analytical woman who didn't just accept things at face value. She folded the statement, her movements precise, and slid it into her purse. Alistair wanted her to be impactful at the gala. A new dangerous idea began to form in her mind. Oh, she would be impactful, but not in the way he or his assistant could ever imagine. The next morning, Meredith didn't confront Alistair. An emotional outburst was exactly what he would expect. Tears, accusations, a scene he could easily dismiss as feminine hysteria. Instead, she channeled her pain into a cold, calculated strategy. She was a researcher at heart, a problem solver. Her marriage was a problem, and Isabella Vance was a variable she needed to understand completely. She contacted a man named Marcus Thorne, a discreet private investigator recommended to her years ago by a corporate lawyer. Marcus was a former MI6 agent, a quiet, unassuming man in his late 50s with eyes that missed nothing. They met in a small, anonymous coffee shop in a part of London Alistair would never visit. Mrs. Williams. Marcus began his voice a low murmur. "You mentioned on the phone this was a matter of extreme sensitivity." Meredith pushed a file across the table. It contained a photo of Isabella she'd downloaded from the company website, the Knightsbridge address from the credit card statement, and the name of the jewelry boutique. "My husband is having an affair with this woman." His assistant, Isabella Vance Meredith, said, her voice steady and devoid of emotion. "I don't just want confirmation. I want to know everything about her, where she comes from, her family, her education, her past relationships, everything." Marcus scanned the documents, his expression unreadable. People like this who attach themselves to wealth so quickly often have carefully curated histories. It's my job to find the pages they've torn out. I'll start with the apartment. For the next week, Meredith lived a double life. To Alistair, she was the same quiet, compliant wife, even feigning interest in the Valentino gowns he'd had sent over. She chose the most dramatic one, a blood-red creation that was completely unlike her usual style, and told him she would wear it to please him. His smug satisfaction was almost unbearable, but she held her composure, viewing it as an actress preparing for a role. Internally, she was a nerve center of anxiety and anticipation, waiting for Marcus's call. It came late one rainy Tuesday afternoon. Meredith, he said, foregoing the formality of her married name. We have a problem. Isabella Vance doesn't exist. The words hung in the air, chilling her to the bone. What do you mean, she doesn't exist? I mean the person you know as Isabella Vance is a ghost, Marcus explained. The social security number she provided to your husband's company is fake. The university degree from the Sorbonne she claims to have, the university has no record of her. The prestigious family from Geneva she talks about. They don't exist. She's a complete fabrication. Meredith sank onto a chair in her study, the room where she'd spent thousands of hours building Alistair's company. A fabrication. The woman who was dismantling her life wasn't even real. So who is she? Meredith whispered. That's what I've been working on. Marcus said. I ran facial recognition against multiple databases using surveillance photos I took outside the Knightsbridge flat. I got a hit, a low-quality one from a 5-year-old fraud case in Miami, Florida. He sent the file to her encrypted email address. Meredith opened it, her hands trembling. The mugshot on the screen showed a younger, harder-looking version of Isabella. Her hair was different, her expression defiant, but the eyes were the same, cold and calculating. And the name beneath the photo was not Isabella Vance. It was Catherine O'Malley. Catherine Kitty O'Malley. Marcus's voice continued over the phone. She was part of a ring that specialized in romance scams, targeting wealthy, middle-aged businessmen. She was charged, but the key witness had a sudden change of heart after an alleged threat, and the case was dropped. After that, she vanished. It seems she came to Europe to find bigger fish. Meredith stared at the screen, a dizzying wave of emotions washing over her. The betrayal was deeper, darker than she could have imagined. Alistair wasn't just having an affair with a younger woman. He had been targeted and ensnared by a professional con artist. He had staked his reputation, his company's security, and his marriage on a woman who was a complete lie. He had brought a viper into their home, into the heart of their empire, and mocked Meredith while doing it. There's more, Marcus said, his tone grim. The jewelry. Elysian Jewels isn't just any boutique. It's known in certain circles as a place to quickly and quietly liquidate assets. She wasn't buying jewelry with your husband's money. She was likely having him buy it for her, then selling it back for cash at a slight loss. And the Knightsbridge apartment. The lease is ending in 2 months. My guess is she was planning her exit strategy. Once she secured what she wanted, perhaps a significant financial settlement or access to sensitive company information, she would disappear, just like she did in Miami. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Isabella's ambition wasn't just to be the new Mrs. Williams. It was to bleed Alistair dry and vanish, leaving him ruined. And Alistair, blinded by his own ego and lust, was handing her the knife to do it. Meredith's grief and anger began to coalesce into a diamond-hard resolve. This was no longer just about a cheating husband. This was about protecting the legacy she had built. Alistair's humiliation of her was a symptom of his own blindness, a blindness that was now threatening to destroy everything. She closed the laptop. She now held a secret that could obliterate Isabella, or Catherine rather, and she knew exactly when and where she was going to reveal it. The Starlight Gala wasn't just a party anymore. It was going to be a courtroom, and she was going to be the prosecution. The blood-red Valentino dress hanging in her closet suddenly seemed fitting. It was the color of war. The 48 hours leading up to the gala were the most surreal of Meredith's life. She moved through her days with a strange, detached calm, the kind of stillness that settles over a battlefield before the first shot is fired. The knowledge she possessed was a physical weight, a dense, powerful core within her. It was a terrible burden and an incredible weapon. Alistair, oblivious, was at his absolute worst. He was preening, energized by the prospect of the gala. He saw it as his coronation, a public celebration of his success, with the beautiful Isabella watching from the wings and his dowdy wife fading ever further into the background. His cruelty became casual, delivered in offhand remarks that were designed to chip away at her last vestiges of self-worth. "Try to keep up tonight, Meredith," he said on the morning of the gala, not even looking up from the knot of his silk tie. "Mingle. Don't just stand in a corner counting the canapes. You need to at least look like you belong." "I'll do my best," she replied, her voice a placid sea belying the hurricane beneath. She had helped him secure half the donors on the event's guest list, but he had long forgotten that. "And for God's sake, let Isabella handle the introductions to the board members from Zurich. You get flustered with languages." He had forgotten that she was fluent in German and French, a skill that had been indispensable in their early European expansion. It was a deliberate, petty erasure of her contributions, of her very identity. The old Meredith would have felt a sting of pain. The new Meredith simply filed it away, another piece of evidence for the judgment to come. That afternoon, she met with Chloe, her closest friend, in a quiet park. Chloe was the only one who knew about the affair, though she didn't yet know the full extent of Meredith's discoveries. "Are you sure you want to go through with this tonight?" Chloe asked. Her brow furrowed with concern as she clutched Meredith's hand. "You could just leave him. Disappear. Start over. Leaving quietly would be a victory for them," Meredith said, her gaze fixed on the distant London skyline. "He would paint me as unstable emotional. She would become the victim who rescued him from a troubled marriage. No, the truth has to come out. Not just for me, but for the company. He's given her a high-level security clearance, Chloe. She has access to everything. This isn't just about my heart. It's about the life's work of hundreds of employees." Chloe squeezed her hand. "Then what's the plan? How are you going to do it?" "He's giving the keynote address tonight." Meredith explained her plan, now fully formed. "He'll be on stage in front of everyone. He loves the spotlight. So I'm going to let him have it. I'm going to let him build himself up as high as he can go. And then I'm going to pull the foundation out from under him." That evening, as she got ready, Meredith felt a transformation taking place. She wasn't just putting on a dress, she was donning armor. The blood-red Valentino gown was a statement. Her hair, usually in a simple, elegant chignon, was styled in soft, glamorous waves by a stylist Chloe had arranged a woman who knew nothing of the night's drama, but sensed the steel in her client's demeanor. Her makeup was understated, but powerful, accentuating the fierce clarity in her eyes. When she descended the grand staircase, Alistair was waiting at the bottom, a glass of scotch in his hand. He stopped mid-sip, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. For a fleeting moment he looked at her, not as the familiar boring wife, but as a striking woman he didn't quite recognize. "Well," he said, recovering quickly, a smirk playing on his lips. "It seems Isabella's choice was a good one. You almost look the part." It was meant to be a final cutting remark, a reminder that even her beauty tonight was not her own. But it didn't land. She simply smiled, a cool, enigmatic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm so glad you approve, darling," she said. "We wouldn't want me to be forgettable tonight, would we?" In the car on the way to the Dorchester Hotel, where the gala was being held, the silence was thick with unspoken words. Alistair was scrolling through his phone, a self-satisfied smile on his face. Meredith knew he was texting Isabella, who would already be there networking, charming, playing the part of the brilliant, indispensable assistant. Meredith looked out the window at the glittering lights of London. She felt no fear, only a profound and terrible clarity. She was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of her own life, and the blast would destroy everything. Her marriage, Alistair's reputation, and a dangerous woman's elaborate web of lies. There would be no going back. And for the first time in years, that felt like freedom. The storm was no longer coming. She was the storm. The ballroom at the Dorchester was a dizzying spectacle of wealth and power. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars cast a glittering golden light over a sea of London's most influential figures. The air hummed with conversation, the clinking of glasses and the soft strains of a string quartet. For a moment, stepping into the throng on Alistair's arm, Meredith felt a pang of nostalgia for the early days when nights like these had felt like a thrilling adventure they were conquering together. The feeling vanished the moment she saw Isabella. She was standing near the main stage, holding a small crowd captive, with a story her laughter bright and artificial. She wore a shimmering silver dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark metallic contrast to Meredith's deep red. Their eyes met across the room. Isabella's smile didn't falter, but she gave Meredith a look of such blatant, triumphant condescension that it was practically a declaration of victory. It was the look of a predator who believed her prey was already defeated. Alistair immediately steered them in her direction. "Isabella, wonderful work with the seating arrangements. Everything is perfect." He gushed his hand, leaving Meredith's arm to rest for a moment too long on the small of Isabella's back. "Only the best for you." Alistair. Isabella purred, her eyes flicking to Meredith. "And Mrs. Williams, that dress is a bold choice. It's wonderful to see you trying new things." The compliment was expertly crafted to sound like an insult, a patronizing pat on the head. Meredith simply smiled, her cool, serene smile. "Thank you, Isabella. It's always important to be prepared for a memorable evening." For the next hour, Meredith played the part of the dutiful wife perfectly. She nodded, she smiled, she allowed Alistair to talk over her. She watched as he and Isabella operated like a well-oiled machine, moving through the crowd, charming donors and sharing inside jokes. They were a team. Meredith was the ghost haunting her own life. With every passing minute, the cold resolve in her heart hardened further. Finally, the time came. The lights dimmed, and the chairman of the Starlight Foundation took the stage to introduce the evening's keynote speaker and primary benefactor, Alistair Williams. Alistair strode onto the stage to thunderous applause. He was in his element, bathed in the spotlight radiating confidence and power. Meredith was expected to stand at the side of the stage, the supportive wife, smiling adoringly. And she did. She stood there, her expression unreadable as he began his speech. He spoke about innovation, about the future, about philanthropy. It was a good speech, polished and inspiring. And then he went off script. "Success is never achieved alone," he said, his voice resonating with false humility. He paused, looking out over the crowd. "I've been blessed with a team that pushes the boundaries of what's possible every single day." He then looked towards Isabella, who was watching from the front table, her face a mask of rapt attention. And in recent times he continued his gaze lingering on her. I've been particularly fortunate to have someone by my side whose vision and passion have been a true source of inspiration, someone who understands the dynamic world we live in. Thank you, Isabella, for bringing such clarity and light to William's innovations. The implication was crystal clear to everyone in the room who knew the whispers. It was a public anointment. Then, as if remembering an afterthought, he turned his head slightly towards Meredith. "And of course I must thank my wife, Meredith," he said, his tone shifting to one of indulgent condescension, "for holding down the fort at home, for her years of quiet support. It's so important to have that kind of stability. Please, a round of applause for her." The applause was hesitant, awkward. The room was thick with embarrassment on her behalf. It was the ultimate humiliation. In front of hundreds of their peers, colleagues, and friends, he had reduced their 10-year partnership to a footnote. He had dismissed her as the domestic, stable, boring foundation upon which his exciting new life was being built. He had publicly crowned his mistress and relegated his wife to the shadows with a dismissive pat on the head. He finished his speech and turned to her, a smug, triumphant smirk on his face, expecting her to shrink away, to perhaps even have tears in her eyes. The guests were looking at her, a sea of pitying faces. This was the moment, the detonation point. Alistair reached for her hand to lead her off stage, but Meredith didn't move. Instead, she stepped forward, moving past him towards the lectern, where the microphone still stood. "Alistair, wait," she said, her voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the silent ballroom. He froze, his smile faltering. "Meredith, what are you doing?" he hissed under his breath. She reached the lectern and gently adjusted the microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces, and for the first time they were all focused solely on her. The quiet, forgettable wife had taken center stage. "My husband is right," she began, her voice ringing with an authority no one in that room had ever heard from her before. "Honesty and clarity are so important in today's world, and he's right to thank those who bring new energy. In fact, his tribute to Miss Vance has inspired me to offer my own." She turned her head and looked directly at Isabella, whose adoring smile was now frozen on her face, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "I think we should all give a truly warm welcome." Meredith continued, her words precise and deliberate. "Not just to Isabella Vance, the brilliant executive assistant from Geneva." She paused, letting the silence stretch, letting every single person in the room lean in, but also to Catherine O'Malley from Miami, Florida. A collective audible gasp swept through the ballroom. The name meant nothing to most but the context. The cold, deliberate way Meredith delivered it was electric. It was the sound of a guillotine blade being released. Isabella Catherine jerked, as if struck. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pallid mask of sheer panic. Her eyes, wide with terror, darted towards the exits. Alistair stared at Meredith, his face a canvas of confusion and fury. "Meredith, what the hell is this? Have you been drinking?" he snarled in a harsh whisper, trying to grab her arm. She moved away from his touch, never taking her eyes off the crowd. "I haven't been drinking, Alistair. I've been doing my due diligence. Something you as a CEO should appreciate." Her voice regained its amplified public tone. "You see, Catherine, or Kitty, as her associates in Miami knew her, has a truly remarkable history. She's not an alumnus of the Sorbonne. She has no prestigious Swiss family. Her real talent lies in asset liquidation and identity fraud. She specializes in targeting successful, but perhaps emotionally vulnerable. Businessmen. A low murmur erupted in the room, growing into a wave of shocked whispers. People were turning to stare at Isabella, who now looked like a cornered animal. The mask of sophistication had shattered, revealing the raw fear of a common criminal. Meredith continued, her voice methodical and relentless, laying out the facts as if presenting a quarterly report. Her standard procedure is quite effective. Fabricate a persona of elegance and intelligence, secure a position of trust, and then begin systematically siphoning funds through luxury goods which are then sold for untraceable cash. For example, a rather lovely diamond necklace purchased last week from Elysian Jewels was likely converted into a more portable form of currency just yesterday. She glanced at Alistair, whose face had gone from red with anger to a ghastly white. He was finally understanding. The adoration he thought he'd earned was a transaction. The passion was a performance. He hadn't been a king choosing a new queen. He had been a mark. She was charged with fraud 5 years ago. Meredith's voice cut through the noise, silencing the room once more. But the case was dropped when a key witness was intimidated into silence. It seems her associates are not just clever, they're dangerous. She let that hang in the air, a subtle threat that underscored the gravity of Alistair's recklessness. He hadn't just brought a mistress into their lives. He had exposed his company and his family to a criminal element. Every word was a perfectly aimed shot. Meredith wasn't yelling or crying. Her calm, factual dismantling of Isabella was 1,000 times more devastating. It was an execution, not a tantrum. She then delivered the final fatal blow. She looked directly at Mr. Harrison, the powerful conservative chairman of the board, a man for whom reputation and security were everything. Alistair, in his infatuation, she said the word, dripping with clinical precision, granted Ms. O'Malley Level 3 security clearance last month. This gave her unrestricted access to our company's intellectual property, our upcoming patents, and the personal financial data of every single one of our board members. The room erupted. The whispers turned into loud, horrified exclamations. Mr. Harrison's face was a stone mask of fury. This was no longer a marital spat. This was a catastrophic breach of corporate security, a scandal that could tank their stock price and trigger shareholder lawsuits. All eyes were now on Isabella. Her composure was completely gone. With a strangled squawk, she turned and fled. She pushed past a stunned waiter, sending a tray of glasses crashing to the floor, and ran from the ballroom, the sound of her silver heels on the marble floor, the only sound in the stunned silence that followed. Meredith looked at her husband. He stood frozen on the stage, the spotlight that he craved now feeling like an interrogation lamp. He looked utterly broken, not by the loss of love, but by the public demolition of his ego and his judgment. He was exposed as a fool, a dupe, a man so blinded by his own vanity that he had nearly destroyed the empire she had helped him build. Her work was done. Without another word, Meredith Williams turned and walked calmly off the stage. She didn't look at Alistair, she didn't look at the shocked faces of the guests. She walked with her head held high, the red of her dress like a victor's flag, leaving behind the smoking crater of the life she had just obliterated, and the man who had so foolishly underestimated her. The silence held for a moment longer, and then the chaos began. The moment Meredith exited the ballroom, the vacuum of silence she left behind shattered into 1,000 shards of chaos. The initial collective shock of the city's elite gave way to a frenzied cacophony of gasps, frantic whispers, and the clicking of phone cameras capturing the scene. The string quartet had fallen silent, their bows hovering over their instruments in disbelief. Alistair stood stranded on the stage, the warm, adoring spotlight of a moment ago now a harsh, unforgiving glare exposing every twitch of his crumbling facade. His face, once a mask of smug triumph, had collapsed into a mess of confusion and abject horror. He looked out at the sea of faces that had been his loyal subjects, but now they stared back with the cold, morbid curiosity reserved for a public execution. Before he could even process what had happened, Mr. Harrison, his face a granite mask of cold fury, was on the stage, flanked by two other powerful board members. Alistair Harrison's voice was a low, dangerous growl barely audible above the din, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You have 5 seconds to get off this stage before I have security drag you off. You are a disgrace to this company and to everyone in this room." Alistair stammered his mind, unable to form a coherent defense. "Arthur, it's a misunderstanding. My wife, she's unwell. The only thing unwell here is your catastrophic judgment." Another board member hissed, his face white with rage. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The party was over, as Alistair was escorted off the stage like a common criminal. The room erupted. Journalists smelling the biggest corporate scandal of the year were already tapping furiously into their phones, their expressions alight with savage glee. The story was too perfect, too dramatic. By the time Meredith reached the hotel lobby, her phone buzzed with the first breaking news alert. The headline, a brutal summary of her actions. "Wife accuses Williams. Innovations. CEO's mistress of fraud in shocking gala takedown." Meredith walked through the opulent lobby, a woman in a blood-red dress moving like a phantom through the wreckage of her own life. She ignored the stunned stares of the hotel staff and the guests who recognized her. The adrenaline that had carried her through the speech was beginning to fade, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. She felt strangely detached, as if she had just watched a film of someone else's life. In the quiet sanctuary of the hotel suite Chloe had booked for her, she finally let her composure falter. She didn't cry. Instead, she walked to the full-length mirror and stared at her reflection. She saw the woman in the Valentino gown, her makeup still perfect, her expression a mixture of steel and sorrow. It was the face of a warrior who had won a terrible, necessary war. She had cauterized a wound, but the burn was deep, and the scars would remain. Chloe called her voice a lifeline of frantic concern and fierce pride. "I saw the news alerts. Meredith, are you okay? What you did, it was legendary." "I'm not sure what I am," Meredith whispered, sinking onto the edge of the bed. "But I'm free." The next morning, the fallout was apocalyptic. The story was on the front page of every major newspaper and was the leading segment on every financial news network. Williams Innovations. A darling of the tech world was now a toxic asset. When the market opened, their stock plummeted by a staggering 30%, wiping out billions in value in a matter of minutes. The board convened an emergency meeting at dawn. The atmosphere was grim. They weren't just dealing with a PR nightmare. They were facing a potential corporate catastrophe. The audit had already begun a frantic search to discover what, if anything, Catherine O'Malley had stolen. Every investor, every partner, every employee was now looking at them, demanding answers. Alistair was not invited. He was the subject of the inquisition. Meanwhile, Catherine O'Malley had vanished, as if she'd never existed. When authorities spurred by a formal complaint from the Williams board arrived at the Knightsbridge apartment, it was all but empty. A few designer clothes were left behind, along with a broken champagne flute on the counter. She had been a ghost ready to disappear the moment her cover was blown. An international arrest warrant was issued, connecting her to the reopened fraud case in Miami. She was gone, leaving Alistair to face the inferno alone. Alistair, locked in the cavernous, silent Mayfair house, was in a self-made hell. The home that had been his palace now felt like a tomb. Meredith's presence was gone, but her absence was a deafening roar in every room. On the cold marble of the hall table, a single crisp envelope waited for him. Inside were divorce papers already signed by Meredith, her signature a clean, decisive stroke. Tucked behind them was the business card of her lawyer, a woman renowned for dismantling the careers of arrogant, powerful men. His phone rang incessantly, a chorus of fury from investors and lawyers. He ignored them and tried to call Meredith, his desperation curdling into rage. He left a string of rambling, pathetic voicemails, each one a testament to his complete lack of self-awareness. Meredith, you've destroyed me. You've destroyed everything. Was this worth it to make a scene? We could have handled this privately. You've cost us billions. You owe me an explanation. Call me back. We need to present a united front to the board. Meredith, call me. He still didn't understand. He saw her actions not as a necessary defense of the company, but as a personal attack on him. He wasn't mourning the loss of his wife. He was mourning the loss of his reflection in the public eye. Late that afternoon, as the company's stock continued to bleed, Meredith received a call. It was Mr. Harrison. Meredith, he said, his voice heavy, not with anger, but with a weary respect. On behalf of the board, we owe you an apology. We were all blinded by Alistair's charisma. We enabled his ego, and we failed to see the rot setting in. You were the only one who saw the truth, and you had the courage to act on it. I only did what was necessary to protect my investment and the work of our employees. She replied, her voice calm and measured. The board has voted unanimously, he continued, getting to the point. Alistair has been suspended indefinitely as CEO pending the results of the full investigation. We're exercising the morality clause in his contract. His judgment cannot be trusted. Meredith, the company is hemorrhaging. We need a leader who can stop the bleeding and restore faith immediately. We need an interim CEO. He paused, the weight of his next words hanging in the balance. The board was unanimous on this as well. We want you, Meredith. The proposition struck her with the force of a physical blow. She stared out her hotel window, her mind reeling. She had planned for a quiet exit, a new life built from the ashes. She had never imagined a path back to the heart of the empire she had been pushed out of. Me, she finally managed to say the word, a whisper. You were the co-founder in spirit, if not on paper, Mr. Harrison said firmly. You have the institutional knowledge that no one else does. You have the respect of the original team. Your actions at the gala, while unorthodox, proved you have an iron will and an unshakable integrity that this company desperately needs right now. You are the only person who can restore faith in Williams' innovations. The only person we trust. Will you do it? Meredith looked out at the city spreading before her. For years she had been a queen in exile, watching the kingdom she built being tarnished by a vain and foolish king. This was not just a job offer. It was a restoration. It was a chance to reclaim her legacy, not as Alistair Williams's quiet wife, but as herself. A sense of purpose, clear and powerful, cut through her exhaustion. "Yes, Mr. Harrison," she said, and her own voice surprised her with its strength. "Yes, I will." A month later, the name on the CEO's office at Williams Innovations had been changed. The polished brass plate now read, Meredith Williams. Her first day walking back through the gleaming glass doors of the headquarters was a study in contrasts. The building was the same monument to success she had helped envision, but she entered it as a different woman. She was no longer a shadow, a visitor, or an accessory on Alistair's arm. She was the commander, and the quiet authority in her stride turned heads. Whispers followed her, not of scandal but of awe. The older employees, the engineers and programmers who remembered her from the grueling startup days, saw her return as a course correction. A young software developer who had only ever known her as the CEO's quiet wife from company photos held a door for her, his eyes wide with a newfound respect. It was a small gesture, but it was everything. Her true test came in the boardroom. The long, imposing table was filled with the same powerful figures who had watched her public humiliation, their faces a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and hope. Mr. Harrison gave her a supportive nod, but the others were waiting to be convinced. They saw the woman who had courageously exposed a criminal, but they were yet to see the leader who could steer a multi-billion-dollar company out of a nosedive. Meredith didn't begin with platitudes or apologies for the recent drama. She began with a plan. She stood at the head of the table, calm and composed, and presented a clear, incisive 90-day strategy. She outlined vulnerabilities in their cybersecurity, overlooked by an ego-driven focus on product launches, and detailed a plan to overhaul them immediately. She identified an innovative clean energy project, one she had championed years ago, before Alistair had shelved it as not glamorous enough, and laid out a revived, fast-tracked development schedule. For the last 2 years, she said, her voice even and steady, "This company has been chasing the spotlight. We've prioritized perception over performance. That ends today. Our foundation is brilliant engineering and unshakable integrity. We will return to that. We will innovate not for headlines, but for genuine progress. We will be a company of substance again." She answered their questions with data and logic, her deep intrinsic knowledge of the company shining through. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. By the end of the meeting, the skepticism in the room had evaporated, replaced by a palpable sense of confidence. She hadn't just taken Alistair's chair. She had earned it. In the weeks that followed, Meredith moved with a purpose that energized the entire organization. Freed from the oppressive weight of Alistair's ego, she flourished. She was decisive, innovative, and empathetic. The press, which had feasted on the scandal, now had a new narrative, the scorned wife rising from the ashes to save the empire. Meredith, who had always shunned the spotlight, now used it with surgical precision. She gave one in-depth interview to a respected financial journal, where she laid out her strategic vision for the company's future. She was poised, brilliant, and utterly in command. The stock, which had been in free fall, stabilized and began a slow, steady climb. The divorce was handled with the same cool efficiency. Her lawyer, a woman known for her aggressive tactics, was surprised by Meredith's instructions. She didn't want to punish Alistair financially. She wanted to sever the ties cleanly and irrevocably. She took what was rightfully hers, a significant share of the company she had co-founded, in all but name, and relinquished any claim on his personal assets. It wasn't about revenge. It was about freedom. Alistair was a ghost of a past life, and she was closing the door on him forever. He became a pariah in the city that once worshipped him. His reputation was gone, His social invitations dried up, and his calls to former colleagues went unanswered. He was left with his money, but stripped of the adoration he craved. He was a king with no kingdom. He was forced to resign permanently from all his positions, a man rendered irrelevant by his own hubris. One evening, about 2 months into her tenure, Meredith was working late in her office. She had redecorated it completely, replacing Alistair's ostentatious mahogany and leather with calming shades of blue, cool grey and minimalist art. It was her space now, a sanctuary of focus and clarity. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom, hesitant. "Ma'am, there's an Alistair Williams here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." A deep stillness settled over Meredith. She felt no fear, no anger, only the quiet finality of a chapter about to be closed. "Send him in." The man who walked through the door was a stranger in a familiar suit. It was tailored and expensive, but it seemed to hang off his frame. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a weary, defeated slump. His eyes, which once scanned every room for admirers, were now fixed on the floor. "Meredith," he began, his voice raspy and thin. "Alistair." She replied, her tone neutral, not rising from her chair. She was behind her desk, a barrier of glass and steel between her present and her past. I'm not here to ask for anything," he stammered, finally looking at her. His eyes were hollow. I had to say it. I'm sorry. For everything. I was a fool, a blind, arrogant fool. I let it all go to my head, and I threw away the most important thing in my life. You. Meredith listened in silence, observing him with a detached sort of pity. He looked like a man who had finally read the last page of a book, only to realize he had misunderstood the entire story. He still thought he was the protagonist. He took a step closer. "I see what you're doing with the company. The clean energy project. It's brilliant. It was always brilliant. I just couldn't see it. I couldn't see you." She finally spoke, her voice soft, but unbreakable. "Do you know what I regret most, Alistair?" He looked at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes, perhaps expecting a confession of lingering love. "It isn't your affair. That was just a symptom of the real disease. I regret allowing you to make me feel small. I regret the thousands of times I quieted my own ideas so your voice could be louder. I regret fading into the background so your light could shine brighter, convincing myself it was a wife's duty. I regret sacrificing my own voice for the sake of your comfort, piece by piece, until I almost forgot I had one." She stood then, a queen in her own right, her presence filling the space he had once dominated. "That is a mistake I will never make again. What you did with Catherine was a betrayal of our marriage. But what I allowed you to do to me over the years was a betrayal of myself. Your apology is for the first act. My new life is the answer to the second." The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a stark, painful understanding. He had not just lost a wife. He had lost the architect of his entire world, a woman whose true value he was only now capable of seeing. "I accept your apology, Alistair," she concluded, her voice softening slightly, not with affection but with finality. "But it changes nothing. There is no going back. I have work to do, building this company into what it was always supposed to be. I wish you well in finding your own way." With a final defeated nod, he turned and walked out of the office, the door clicking softly shut behind him, closing on a decade of their life together. Meredith didn't watch him go. She turned to the vast window, looking out at the glittering cityscape. The lights of London twinkled back at her, no longer a symbol of her isolation, but a reflection of her own brilliance. The fire she had walked through had burned away the gilded cage, and, from the ashes, she had been reborn. Not as Mrs. Alistair Williams, the quiet wife, but as Meredith Williams, the woman who had saved them all. And her work was just beginning. What a journey of betrayal, humiliation, and ultimate vindication. Meredith's story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room, but about having the courage to speak the truth when it matters most. She transformed her deepest pain into her greatest victory, not through revenge, but through reclaiming her own power and identity. Her story shows that underestimating the quiet ones is a mistake that can bring down empires. If you were moved by Meredith's incredible transformation from a forgotten wife to a powerhouse CEO, please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you enjoyed the story, and share it with someone who loves a tale of justice and empowerment. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of karma resilience and the incredible strength of the human spirit. Thank you for listening. The rain that lashed against the wrought iron gates of the Davenport mansion wasn't just weather. It was an omen. For Chloe Walsh, it was the sound of her world shattering. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and betrayal. Her husband, the tech millionaire Jonathan Davenport, stood before her. His handsome face a mask of cold fury. He wasn't just ending their marriage. He was erasing her. Pregnant, terrified, and with nothing but the clothes on her back, she was cast out into the storm. Little did he know he hadn't just thrown away his wife. He had declared war on a silent giant, a man who had watched over her from the shadows her entire life, a man whose name could make kings and presidents tremble. Life as Mrs. Jonathan Davenport was a lesson in beautiful imprisonment. Chloe had met Jonathan at a small art gallery, where her paintings, vibrant and full of raw emotion, were on display. He was charming, effusive, and intoxicatingly powerful. He saw her. He said a rare flower in a world of weeds. He showered her with gifts, whisked her away on private jets, and within 6 months, she was Chloe Davenport, mistress of a sprawling Long Island estate that the press had dubbed the Glass Palace. But the glass, she soon learned, was for looking in, not out. Jonathan, the CEO of Davenport Tech, a rising star in the cutthroat world of Silicon Valley East, was a man obsessed with image. Her art, once the very thing that drew him to her, became a messy hobby. Her friends from her old life were deemed unsuitable. Her world shrank until it contained only Jonathan and his formidable mother, Beatrice Davenport. Beatrice was a woman carved from ice, whose approval was a currency Chloe could never seem to earn. She viewed Chloe as a temporary adornment, a pretty placeholder, until Jonathan found someone from their own stratosphere. Beatrice's quiet condescension was a constant corrosive drip. "That dress is lovely, dear," she'd say, "for someone with your background." The news of Chloe's pregnancy should have been a joyous occasion. When she told Jonathan, placing his hand on her still flat stomach, He smiled for the cameras in his mind. "A Davenport heir," he'd boomed, kissing her forehead with performative delight. But in private, the warmth vanished. A baby was an inconvenience, a disruption to his meticulously planned 5-year corporate expansion. "Are you sure about this, Chloe?" he asked one evening, swirling a glass of Macallan 18. "It's a bit premature. It will affect our travel schedule." "It's a baby, Jonathan, not a scheduling conflict," she replied, a sliver of her old fire showing through. His eyes narrowed. "Everything is a scheduling conflict, my dear. You should know that by now." The chill between them deepened. Beatrice's visits became more frequent, her whispers to Jonathan more venomous. Chloe felt like a ghost in her own home, her pregnancy the only thing that felt real. She would spend hours in the West Wing studio. Jonathan had begrudgingly allowed her the smell of turpentine and oil paints, her only comfort. She painted with a feverish intensity, channeling her fear and loneliness onto the canvas. The end came with a sudden brutal efficiency. Jonathan returned home from a week-long business trip to Zurich, his face a thundercloud. Beatrice was with him, a grim sentinel. "I know what you've been doing," Jonathan spat, throwing a glossy 8x10 photograph onto the marble coffee table. Chloe stared at the image. It was her having lunch in the city a few days prior. Sitting across from her was David Chen, an old friend from art school who had been visiting New York. In the photo, the angle was deceptive. David was leaning in his hand near hers on the table, a look of concern on his face as she spoke. It looked intimate, conspiratorial. "Jonathan, this is David. He's a friend. He's gay, for God's sake. We were just catching up." "A likely story," Beatrice sneered. "I had my suspicions. A girl like you, Chloe. Your kind is never satisfied." "What are you talking about?" Chloe's voice trembled, a cold dread seeping into her bones. "Don't play dumb," Jonathan roared, his voice echoing in the cavernous room. "While I'm working to provide this life for you, you're sneaking around with your friends. You thought you could pass another man's child off as mine, as a Davenport." The accusation was so monstrous, so utterly insane, that for a moment Chloe couldn't breathe. "Jonathan, that's a lie. This is your baby. I love you." Her words were like sparks hitting wet stone. He was beyond reason, his eyes filled with a righteous fury she now realized was completely manufactured. This was a performance. This was her execution. "I want you out," he said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm level. "Now, out." "What do you mean?" she whispered, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. "Jonathan, I'm pregnant. It's pouring rain. Where would I go?" "I don't care," he said, pulling out his wallet. He peeled off 5 $100 bills and threw them on the floor at her feet. "That's more than you were worth when I found you. Consider it severance." Beatrice smiled, a thin, cruel slash of red lipstick. "Security will see you out. Don't take anything. The clothes you are wearing are of course a gift." 2 burly men in black suits appeared as if on cue. They didn't touch her, but their presence was an unmovable wall. Numb with shock, Chloe walked towards the door. She didn't look back. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. As the heavy oak door clicked shut behind her, sealing her out of the life she knew. The first clap of thunder rattled the sky. She stood on the manicured stone steps of the glass palace, a 3-month-old life growing inside her with $500 and a shattered heart, as the heavens opened up and wept. The city at night is a different beast when you have nowhere to go. The glittering lights of Manhattan, once a symbol of her new life, now seemed to mock Chloe. The rain plastered her thin silk blouse to her skin, and the $500 in her pocket felt as useless as sand. Her phone. It was inside on the nightstand. Her credit cards cancelled, she was certain. Jonathan was nothing if not thorough. She found a dingy all-night diner, the steam from the kitchen fogging the windows. She ordered a cup of tea she couldn't afford to drink and sat in a corner booth shivering. The reality was a physical weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She was homeless, pregnant, alone. Her first and only call was to her best friend, Jessica. Using the diner's grimy payphone, she choked out the address. An hour later, Jessica burst in her face a mask of fury and concern. That monster. That absolute monster. Jessica raged as she bundled Chloe into her tiny, cluttered apartment in Queens. She wrapped her in a thick blanket and forced a warm mug of soup into her hands. "We'll fight this, Chloe. We'll get a lawyer. He can't just do this." But Chloe knew better. Jonathan's lawyers were sharks from the most expensive firms in the city. They could bury a person in legal fees and paperwork until they simply ceased to exist. Against the Davenport Emperor, she and Jessica were ants. For 3 days, Chloe existed in a fog of grief. She barely ate, barely slept. The baby was a constant, fluttering reminder of everything she had just lost. Was it his? Of course it was. But how could she ever prove it against the lies Jonathan would weave? On the 4th night, while Jessica was at her waitressing job, Chloe was rummaging through the single suitcase of old belongings she had stored at her friend's apartment, relics from her pre-Jonathan life. At the very bottom, beneath old sketchbooks and worn-out sweaters, was a small, lacquered wooden box. Her parents had died in a car crash when she was 19, leaving her with little more than a mountain of medical debt and this box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, impossibly thick business card. The paper was creamy and heavy, the text embossed in a simple, elegant font. Arthur Pendleton. Pendleton and Associates. Fidelitas et Fortitudo. Below the name was a phone number and a private address on 5th Avenue. Her father, a kind but perpetually struggling history professor, had given her the box on her 18th birthday. "Chloe," he had said, his voice serious. "This is for an emergency. Not a my car broke down emergency, but a the world is ending emergency. This man, he was my dearest friend. He is your godfather. He made me promise that if anything ever happened to me, you would have his protection. Don't ever lose this." She had never called. Her pride, her desire to make it on her own, had always stopped her. Contacting some mysterious, powerful friend of her father's felt like giving up. Now she had nothing left but giving up. The world, as her father had predicted, felt like it was ending. Her fingers trembling, she picked up Jessica's landline phone. It was almost 10 p.m. It was a crazy long shot. She dialed the number. An automated system picked up. "You have reached the after-hours security desk for Pendleton and Associates. Our offices are closed." Chloe's heart sank. Of course. "If this is a personal matter for Mr. Pendleton, please state your name and the nature of your call after the tone. Messages are transcribed and reviewed." A beep sounded. Chloe took a shaky breath. "My name is Chloe Walsh. My father was Professor Michael Walsh. He told me to call this number if I ever truly needed help. I truly need help." She hung up, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. It was a message in a bottle thrown into a digital ocean. He probably wouldn't even get it. Or if he did, why would he care about the destitute daughter of a friend he hadn't seen in over a decade? She curled up on Jessica's lumpy sofa, the business card clutched in her hand, and for the first time in days, she cried herself to sleep. She was woken just after 7 a.m. by the insistent buzzing of Jessica's phone. Jessica, bleary-eyed, answered it. "Hello? Yes, she's here. Who is this? Oh. One moment." Jessica held the phone out to Chloe, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Chloe, it's for you. It's a woman named Ms. Albright, from the office of Arthur Pendleton." Chloe's heart hammered against her ribs. She took the phone. "Hello, Miss Chloe Walsh." The voice was crisp, professional, and held an undercurrent of warmth that was instantly calming. "My name is Genevieve Albright. I am Mr. Pendleton's chief of staff. He received your message. He has cleared his entire morning schedule. He would like to see you at your earliest convenience. A car is waiting for you downstairs." Chloe was speechless. She looked out Jessica's third-floor window. Down on the street, parked between a beat-up sedan and a recycling truck, was a gleaming black Bentley. The Bentley was an island of silent luxury gliding through the raucous morning traffic of Queens and into the stately canyons of Manhattan. Chloe felt impossibly small and out of place in its plush leather interior. She was still wearing a borrowed sweater from Jessica and a pair of old jeans. She hadn't even had time to properly brush her hair. The car pulled up to a discreet limestone building on Fifth Avenue, a few blocks from Central Park. There was no grand sign, only a small, polished brass plaque that read, "Pendleton and Associates." A doorman in a sharp grey uniform opened her door before the car had even fully stopped. "Miss Walsh, welcome. Mr. Pendleton is expecting you." She was led not into a typical office lobby, but into what felt like a private library. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves were filled with leather-bound books. The air smelled of old paper lemon oil and money so old it had forgotten how to shout. Ms. Albright, an elegant woman in her late 50s, with silver hair, swept into a perfect chignon, greeted her with a gentle smile. "Chloe, it's a pleasure to finally meet you. Arthur, Mr. Pendleton is just finishing a call. Can I get you some tea? Something to eat?" Her kindness was so unexpected it almost made Chloe cry. She numbly accepted the tea. A few minutes later, a set of tall, soundproof doors opened. "Send her in, Genevieve." The voice was deep calm and carried an effortless authority. Chloe walked into the office. It was larger than Jessica's entire apartment. One wall was a plate glass window with a breathtaking view of Central Park. The man standing by the window turned and Chloe's breath caught. She had expected someone old and frail. Arthur Pendleton was in his late 60s, but he stood with the posture of a man half his age. He was tall and lean, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His hair was a distinguished silver, but his eyes, a startlingly sharp blue, were what held her. They were filled with an unnerving intelligence, a deep-seated power, and something else she couldn't quite place, a profound sadness. "Chloe," he said, his voice softening, "you have your mother's eyes." He gestured to a comfortable leather chair opposite his immense desk. He didn't sit behind it in the seat of power. Instead, he took the chair next to hers. "Your father," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "was the best man I ever knew. He was the best man at my wedding. I was the best man at his. We met at university. He was the brilliant scholar with no money, and I was the fool with a trust fund who didn't know what to do with it. He taught me about history, about integrity. He taught me what mattered. When he and your mother passed, I was abroad closing the biggest deal of my life. I didn't get back in time for the funeral. It is the single greatest regret of my life." He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "I promised him I would always be there for you. A promise I have clearly failed to keep. I respected your desire for independence, but I should have checked in. I should have done more than just watch from a distance. For that, I am truly sorry. Now," he leaned forward slightly, "tell me everything, and do not spare a single detail." And so she did. The whole story poured out of her. The whirlwind romance, the gilded could Beatrice's cruelty, Jonathan's cold ambition, the pregnancy, the fake photograph, and the final humiliating expulsion into the rain. She spoke for nearly an hour, her voice cracking at times, but she didn't cry. Arthur Pendleton listened with an almost unnerving stillness, his expression unreadable, his blue eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, the silence in the room was heavy. Arthur stood and walked to the window, his back to her, looking out over the park. "Davenport Tech," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I know the company. Over-leveraged, built on a foundation of aggressive acquisitions and hype. Jonathan Davenport fancies himself a modern-day Rockefeller, I hear." He turned around, and the sadness in his eyes had been replaced by something else entirely. It was a cold, controlled fire. It was the look of a predator. "He made 2 mistakes," Arthur said, his voice like chipping granite. "The first was laying a hand on the daughter of Michael Walsh. The second was thinking he could get away with it." He walked to his desk and pressed an intercom button. "Genevieve, clear my schedule for the rest of the week. Get me Robert Chen from litigation, Maria Fuentes from forensic accounting, and Daniel Silva from our private investigations unit. I want them in the main conference room in 10 minutes. Also have the penthouse suite at the Pendleton Grand prepared for Ms. Walsh, indefinitely. And call Dr. Madigan. I want her to assemble the best prenatal team in the country for an immediate consultation." He released the button and looked back at Chloe. "You are not homeless, Chloe. You are not alone. You are a Pendleton ward. From this moment on, every resource I possess is at your disposal. We are not going to get you a settlement. We are going to dismantle Jonathan Davenport's world piece by piece. He wanted to erase you. Instead, we will make him wish he had never been born." Chloe stared at him, bewildered by the speed and scale of his response. "Pendleton and Associates. I thought you were a lawyer." Arthur Pendleton gave a slight, grim smile. "I am a lawyer, Chloe. But Pendleton and Associates is not a law firm. It is the holding company for my family's assets. I own banks, real estate, tech firms, media outlets. I have a law firm, of course, one of the best, and you have just become its most important client." He was her godfather, but he wasn't just a lawyer. He was a billionaire, a titan of industry whose name was whispered with fear and reverence on Wall Street and in the halls of power. And Jonathan Davenport had just picked a fight with him. The Pendleton Grand Hotel was not a place you simply booked a room. It was a place you were invited to. Chloe was escorted to the penthouse suite, a sprawling apartment in the sky with panoramic views of the city she had been cast out of just days before. A personal attendant showed her the walk-in closet, already stocked with a collection of designer maternity wear. A private chef was on call. A team of doctors led by the renowned Dr. Eleanor Madigan arrived within hours for a gentle, thorough consultation, assuring her that she and the baby were healthy. It was disorienting. She had gone from a queen's sofa to unimaginable luxury in the span of a morning. But beneath the comfort, a new feeling was taking root, a fierce, burning resolve. She wasn't just a victim to be coddled. She was a partner in the coming war. Meanwhile, in the main conference room at Pendleton and Associates, the gears were turning. Robert Chen, a legendary litigator with a reputation for surgically dismantling his opponents in court. Maria Fuentes, a forensic accountant who could find a single fraudulent dollar in a mountain of offshore shell corporations. And Daniel Silva, a former intelligence operative who ran Pendleton's private security and investigations, all sat around a gleaming obsidian table. Arthur presided. The objective is not just victory, but annihilation. Arthur stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Jonathan Davenport believes his money makes him untouchable. We will demonstrate that his wealth is a house of cards in a hurricane. The plan was multifaceted. Maria and her team would begin a deep dive into Davenport Tech's financials and Jonathan's personal accounts. His new money, Maria said, her eyes gleaming. They're always sloppy. They want to hide their wealth, but they also can't resist showing it off. I'll find the seams. Daniel Silva's team would handle the infidelity accusation, a faked photo. A coerced friend, Daniel said with a dismissive wave. Amateur hour. We'll find the photographer who took the picture, the original files, the payment trail. We'll find out who paid him. We'll have a signed, notarized confession on your desk within 72 hours. Robert Chen, the lawyer, would prepare the legal assault. We won't just file for divorce, he said, tapping a pen on a legal pad. We'll file for annulment on the grounds of fraud alongside the divorce proceedings. We'll file for damages for emotional distress, defamation, and wrongful eviction. We'll hit him with a temporary restraining order, so severe he won't be able to come within 500 yards of Ms. Walsh or any property she occupies. And we will do it all very, very publicly. The first shot was fired 2 days later. Jonathan Davenport was the guest of honor at the annual Titans of Tech charity gala, a glittering affair filled with reporters and industry rivals. He was preening for the cameras, a beautiful model on his arm, projecting an image of a man unbothered moving on. As he was pontificating about his company's new AI venture, a man in an impeccably tailored yet unassuming suit approached him. "Miss Jonathan Davenport?" the man asked politely but firmly. "Yes," Jonathan answered, annoyed at the interruption. The man handed him a thick, cream-colored envelope. "You've been served." Jonathan stared at the envelope, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He probably expected some nuisance suit from a low-rent lawyer Chloe had managed to scrape together. He opened it. The weight of the paper alone was intimidating. He scanned the first page. His face, which had been a mask of smug confidence, slowly drained of all color. The camera flashes which he had been soaking in moments before now seemed to illuminate his sudden, stark terror. He saw the claims, fraud, defamation, a dozen other terrifying legal terms. He saw the demand for a full forensic audit of all his assets, personal and corporate. But it was the letterhead at the top of the page that made his blood run cold. It didn't say Chen, Miller and Finch, or some other expected legal name. It said simply, Pendleton and Associates Office of the General Counsel. He had never heard of it, which in his world meant it was nothing. He turned to his own lawyer, a bulldog named Mr. Graves, who was standing nearby. "What the hell is this Pendleton and Associates?" Mr. Graves took the document, read the first page, and his professionally cynical face went pale. He looked at Jonathan as if he were a dead man walking. "Oh God, Jonathan," Graves whispered, his voice hoarse. "What did you do?" "What?" Jonathan snapped. "It's some no-name firm. We'll crush them." Graves shook his head, looking around the room as if expecting a bolt of lightning to strike them both. "Jonathan, Pendleton and Associates isn't a law firm. It's Arthur Pendleton. You haven't hired a lawyer. Chloe has hired a god. We're not in a lawsuit. We're in a war. We've already lost." Panic is an acid. For Jonathan Davenport, it began to eat away at the polished veneer he had spent his life constructing. His initial bluster faded quickly after his conversation with Graves. He learned that Arthur Pendleton wasn't just a billionaire. He was a keystone of the global financial system. He sat on boards, advised governments, and owned silent, controlling stakes in companies Jonathan thought were his competitors. To anger Arthur Pendleton was akin to personally offending the laws of gravity. The assault was relentless and silent. There were no angry phone calls, no threatening letters. There was only a quiet, systematic dismantling of his life. Maria Fuentes' team of forensic accountants worked with the efficiency of a military unit. They were financial ghosts, slipping through digital firewalls and untangling complex webs of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Panama that Jonathan had created to hide assets and evade taxes. They discovered he hadn't just hidden money from Chloe. He'd been hiding it from the IRS for years. They found evidence that Davenport Tech's spectacular earnings reports were inflated, propped up by shell companies buying their own products to create the illusion of massive growth. Simultaneously, Daniel Silver's investigators addressed the personal betrayal. They didn't need 72 hours. It took them 48. They tracked down the photographer, a freelancer named Marco, in his rundown studio in Brooklyn. Marco, when faced with two of Silver's calm but imposing operatives and the threat of federal charges for conspiracy and fraud, confessed immediately. He hadn't just been paid. He'd been coached by Beatrice Davenport herself. She had met with him, given him the time and place of Chloe's lunch, and instructed him on the exact angles to shoot to imply an affair. The payment, a substantial sum of $50,000, had been made from a trust fund Beatrice controlled. Daniel's team had the bank records, a recording of Marco's confession, and the original time-stamped digital photos, which clearly showed the lunch for what it was, an innocent meeting between friends. But they didn't stop there. They dug into Beatrice's life. They discovered that she had been pressuring Jonathan to break his prenuptial agreement with Chloe and marry the daughter of a rival tech mogul, a move that would have created a powerful corporate alliance. Chloe and her unborn child were not just an inconvenience. They were an obstacle to a merger. The accusation of infidelity wasn't born of suspicion. It was a calculated business decision. Jonathan felt the ground crumbling beneath him. His business partners grew distant. Bankers who had once fawned over him suddenly weren't returning his calls. Whispers started circulating on Wall Street about Davenport Tech being a house of cards. A prominent financial news blog, which Chloe now knew was owned by a subsidiary of Pendleton and Associates, published a well-sourced, deeply researched article questioning the company's valuation and accounting practices. The stock price, once his proudest achievement, began to slide. He stormed into his mother's penthouse apartment on Park Avenue, waving a copy of the legal filings. "This is your fault," he screamed. "You and your pathetic little scheme with the photographer. Did you have any idea who her family was?" Beatrice, for the first time in Jonathan's memory, looked frightened. "How could I know? She was a nobody. A scholarship artist from nowhere, Well, her godfather is Arthur Pendleton, he roared. The Arthur Pendleton, he's going to ruin us. He's going to ruin me. Don't be ridiculous, Jonathan, she said, trying to regain her composure. It's a simple divorce, a domestic squabble. We will offer her a generous settlement. She will take the money and disappear. You don't get it, do you? He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. They're not asking for money. They're asking for everything. They sent a subpoena for every financial record going back 10 years. They know about the Zurich accounts. They know about the shell companies. Beatrice sank into a silk-upholstered chair, her face ashen. The world she had so carefully dominated, the world of society galas and boardroom whispers, was dissolving. They had kicked a hornet's nest, only to discover it was attached to a grizzly bear. The final blow to Jonathan's personal life came not from a lawyer, but from Chloe herself. Under the guidance of Robert Chen, she filed a petition not just for divorce, but for a court-ordered paternity test to be administered the moment the baby was born. The petition was made public. The story was irresistible to the press. The millionaire who threw his pregnant wife out over cheating allegations was now being legally challenged to prove the child wasn't his. His narrative of the wronged husband was shattered. He was now cast as the villain, a cruel, paranoid bully. The public, and more importantly, the market, loves a hero and despises a villain. And Jonathan Davenport had been irrevocably cast. The day of the preliminary hearing was a media circus. Reporters and television crews crowded the steps of the New York County Courthouse. Jonathan Davenport arrived looking haggard, his bespoke suit unable to hide the stress that had carved new lines into his face. He walked with a forced confidence, flanked by Mr. Graves and a team of anxious-looking junior lawyers. Then Chloe arrived. She didn't slip in through a side entrance. She walked up the main steps, poised and serene. She was dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue maternity dress, her condition now obvious and undeniable. She wasn't alone. On one side was her lead counsel, the formidable Robert Chen. On the other, walking with a calm, protective authority that silenced the crowd, was Arthur Pendleton. He wasn't on the legal team, but his presence was a statement more powerful than any legal brief. The lion was there to watch over his cub. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Harriet Miller, looked down from her bench with an expression of deep impatience for the theatrics. Mr. Graves began attempting to paint Jonathan as the victim of a gold-digging opportunist. He spoke of Chloe's humble origins and Jonathan's generosity. He brought up the photograph as evidence of her infidelity. Your Honor, Graves argued, my client had every reason to believe his trust had been betrayed. He acted out of heartbreak. When he finished, Robert Chen rose. He was a master of understated destruction. He didn't raise his voice. He simply presented facts. Your Honor, the defense speaks of heartbreak. We will speak of conspiracy. We submit Exhibit A, a sworn videotaped affidavit from Mr. Marco Velez, the photographer hired to take these pictures. He played the video. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Marco detailed his meetings with Beatrice Davenport, her explicit instructions and the payment he received. We submit Exhibit B. Chen continued, his voice even. Bank records confirming a transfer of $50,000 from a trust managed by Ms. Beatrice Davenport to Mr. Velez, dated 2 days before the photographs were taken. A murmur went through the courtroom. Jonathan shot a murderous look at his mother, who was sitting in the front row, looking as if she had swallowed poison. As for my client's alleged opportunism, Chen went on, we have a different narrative. The narrative of a wife who was systematically isolated, emotionally abused, and ultimately discarded when she and her unborn child became an impediment to her husband's business ambitions. He then dropped the bombshell. Furthermore, Your Honor, our forensic accounting review, which is still in its preliminary stages, has uncovered significant financial discrepancies. We have evidence of numerous undisclosed offshore accounts, the systematic undervaluation of marital assets, and potential corporate fraud designed to deceive not only my client, but Mr. Davenport's shareholders and the Internal Revenue Service. We have already forwarded our initial findings to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. The air was sucked out of the room. This was no longer a divorce hearing. It was a potential federal criminal case. Mr. Graves was on his feet objecting furiously, but the damage was done. Judge Miller's eyes were fixed on Jonathan, her expression one of utter contempt. But Arthur Pendleton had one more move to make. He had promised Chloe he would not just win, but that he would give her back her voice. Robert Chen called Chloe to the stand. Her voice was quiet but steady as she answered Chen's questions, recounting the loneliness of her marriage and the terror of being thrown out. Then Mr. Graves made the fatal mistake of cross-examining her. He tried to portray her as hysterical and vindictive. "Miss Walsh," he began with a sneer, "isn't it true that you were unhappy in your marriage and saw this pregnancy as a way to secure a larger payday?" Chloe looked not at the lawyer but directly at Jonathan. "I was unhappy because my husband treated me like an acquisition, not a wife. And this baby—" Her voice broke for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure, placing a hand on her stomach. "This baby is the only thing from that life that was ever truly real. The only thing that wasn't about money or appearances. And you," she said to Jonathan, her voice ringing with clarity, "you threw us away like we were trash. You can keep your money. You can keep your glass palace. All I want is for my child to have a father worthy of the name. And that man is not you." Her words hung in the silent courtroom. It was over. Everyone knew it. Jonathan Davenport sat slumped in his chair, a broken man. He had come to court to paint his wife as a villain and had been exposed as a monster. The law, backed by the infinite resources and cold fury of Arthur Pendleton, had peeled back his layers of wealth and revealed the rotten core within. The judgment in the courtroom was not an ending, but the beginning of a final, spectacular collapse. The news that the U.S. Attorney's Office was investigating Davenport Tech hit the financial world like a lightning strike. The company, once the darling of Wall Street, became instantly toxic. Its stock, which Jonathan had watched climb with godlike pride, didn't just slide. It plummeted into a free fall from which it would never recover. Investors, partners, and board members ran for the exits, trampling one another in a desperate stampede to disassociate themselves from the Davenport name. Jonathan was forced into a humiliating resignation, a deposed king cast out of his own castle. Faced with the ironclad evidence presented by Pendleton's team and the looming threat of decades in federal prison for a litany of fraud and tax evasion charges, Jonathan Davenport's fight was over. He capitulated completely. The divorce settlement was a meticulous, brutal dissection of a fallen empire. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a list of terms delivered by Robert Chen, to which Jonathan's lawyers could only nod in weary acceptance. Chloe received a financial settlement so substantial it guaranteed the generational security of her and her child. But the monetary aspect was secondary. The true justice was in the details. In a final act of poetic retribution, she was awarded the entirety of Jonathan's private art collection. He had bought masterpieces to prove his status, but now the collection, including several of Chloe's own early paintings he had once condescendingly purchased, belonged to the artist he had tried to silence. The crown jewel of the settlement, however, was full unencumbered ownership of the Long Island mansion, the glass palace itself. For Beatrice Davenport, the punishment was not financial, but social. The society she had ruled with an iron fist turned on her with breathtaking secours. Invitations to galas dried up. Her calls went unreturned. She was publicly snubbed at a charity luncheon she had chaired for a decade, the whispers of the women at the surrounding tables as sharp and cold as ice. Stripped of her son's fortune and influence, she was just an old, cruel woman in an opulent Park Avenue apartment, a queen reigning over a kingdom of ghosts. A month after the settlement was finalized, Chloe drove out to Long Island alone. She walked through the silent, cavernous rooms of the mansion, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. It was a mausoleum of a life she no longer recognized. She stood in the West Wing studio, the afternoon light streaming through the massive windows. This room had been her only sanctuary, but it was also a part of her prison. She could still feel the phantom chill of Jonathan's disapproval, the lingering scent of Beatrice's expensive, judgmental perfume. She knew then she could never live there. The house wasn't a prize, it was a chain. Following a long conversation with Arthur, she made a decision. She put the mansion and its entire contents on the market. It sold within a week to a foreign investor. With the immense proceeds, she established the Walsh Foundation, a non-profit with a singular clear mission to provide grants, studio space, and mentorship to gifted young artists who, like her, came from backgrounds with no connections and no money. She would turn her gilded cage into a key for others. 6 months after her day in court, Chloe gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby boy. In the quiet private hospital room, paid for by her own funds, she held her son and cried tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She named him Michael after the father whose integrity and love had reached across time to save her. Arthur Pendleton was the first visitor. The titan of industry, a man who could move markets with a single phone call, entered the room with a reverence Chloe had never seen. When she placed the tiny bundled baby in his arms, the powerful billionaire seemed to melt. He looked down at the face of his god-grandson, his sharp blue eyes softening with a profound love and a fierce protectiveness. "Hello, Michael," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Your grandfather was the greatest man I ever knew. You have a lot to live up to." In that moment, Chloe knew her son would never lack for a strong, honorable father figure. She found a new home, not in the ostentatious world of Manhattan penthouses or Long Island estates, but in a beautiful, light-filled brownstone in a quiet, tree-lined Brooklyn neighborhood. It had a small garden in the back and high ceilings that welcomed the sun. The entire top floor became her studio, a sprawling, happy mess of canvases, paint, and light. It wasn't a cage, it was a nest. Here she began to paint again. The frantic, fearful energy that had fueled her work in the mansion was gone. It was replaced by a deep, powerful current of peace and strength. She painted Michael sleeping in his crib, the sunlight tracing patterns on his face. She painted the view from her studio window, the changing seasons on her quiet street. Her work was imbued with a raw honesty and a mature confidence that was breathtaking. A year after Michael's birth, her old friend from the gallery that had started it all begged her to do a solo show. Chloe was hesitant, but Arthur encouraged her. "It is time," he said, "for the world to see you as you are." The opening night was packed. The art world was buzzing with the story of the artist who had emerged from the ashes of a scandalous divorce. But when they saw the paintings, the gossip fell away, replaced by an awed silence. The work was undeniable. It was the art of a woman who had seen the worst of the world and had chosen to create beauty. The entire collection sold out before the night was over. A review in a major art journal called her the defining new voice of her generation. One afternoon, while rocking Michael to sleep, she saw a small article on her tablet. Jonathan Davenport had accepted a plea bargain, agreeing to serve 3 years in a minimum security prison and pay hundreds of millions in fines. He was a cautionary tale, a footnote in the business pages. Chloe looked at the article, then at the sleeping child in her arms, and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a distant, quiet peace. He was a ghost from another life. She was no longer Chloe Davenport, the millionaire's discarded wife. She was Chloe Walsh, a mother, a philanthropist, and a celebrated artist whose voice, once silenced, now resonated with power and truth. She had learned the hardest lesson of all, that some cages are made of gold, and true freedom isn't about escaping them, but about having the strength to build your own world. She had lost a husband who saw her as a possession, but had found a family that cherished her as a treasure. In the end, Jonathan hadn't erased her. His cruelty had been the catalyst that set her free, allowing her to take the shattered pieces of her past and create a new masterpiece more vibrant and beautiful than any she had ever dared to imagine. 4 years passed in a blur of creative fulfillment and domestic peace. Chloe's world was a vibrant canvas painted in the bright, happy colors of her son. Michael's laughter, the warm, earthy tones of her work in the studio, and the steady, grounding presence of Arthur Pendleton. Michael, at 5 years old, was a whirlwind of energy and curiosity, with his mother's artistic sensitivity and a sharp, inquisitive mind that missed nothing. The Walsh Foundation had become a celebrated success, launching the careers of several brilliant young artists, who in turn were changing the landscape of the New York art scene. Chloe's life was full her past, a distant storm she had long since weathered. The news arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, delivered by Arthur in the quiet study of her Brooklyn brownstone, as Michael napped upstairs. "He's been released," Arthur said, his voice calm, but with a protective edge. "Jonathan Davenport, early release for good behavior. My people tell me he served his time quietly. He's out with a fraction of his former wealth, living in a rented apartment in New Jersey." Chloe felt a sudden phantom chill, an involuntary tightening in her chest. It wasn't the paralyzing fear of before, but the unpleasant shock of a healed wound being unexpectedly prodded. "What does he want?" she asked, her voice steady. "We don't know yet," Arthur admitted. "He's made no moves, contacted no one. He is for all intents and purposes a private citizen. But we are watching him, Chloe. He will not get within a mile of you or Michael without us knowing." She nodded, grateful for the invisible fortress Arthur had built around their lives. She tried to push the thought of Jonathan away, to file it under past threats neutralized. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. A week later, Michael came home from his kindergarten class. His face scrunched in thought. He was quiet during dinner, pushing his food around his plate. Later, as Chloe was tucking him into bed, he finally asked the question she had been dreading for 5 years. "Mummy," he said, his small voice serious as he looked up at her with wide, innocent eyes. "At circle time, we talked about our families. Everyone has a mummy and a daddy. You're my mummy, but where is my daddy? The simple, guileless question struck her with more force than any legal summons or public humiliation ever had. How could she explain a man like Jonathan to this perfect, loving child? How could she distill the cruelty, the betrayal, and the greed into a story a 5-year-old could understand without being poisoned by it? To lie felt wrong. To tell the truth felt like a kind of violence. That night, after Michael was asleep, she called Arthur, her voice thick with unshed tears. What do I say to him, Arthur? How do I tell him his father is a man who tried to pretend he didn't exist? Arthur's voice was a comforting balm. You tell him a version of the truth that he can carry, he advised gently. You tell him that a father isn't just the person who helps make you, but the person who shows up to love you. You tell him his father made very big mistakes that hurt people and that he had to go away. And then you remind him of all the love he does have. Your love. My love. That is his truth, Chloe. That is his foundation. Armed with this wisdom, she felt stronger. But the ultimate test was yet to come. The following Saturday, while leaving a small bookstore with Michael, she saw him. Jonathan. He was standing across the street looking thin and shockingly ordinary in a worn jacket. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a hesitant, haunted stillness. He wasn't watching them in a menacing way. He looked almost lost. When his eyes met hers, a jolt went through her, but she felt no fear. She simply tightened her grip on Michael's hand and walked away. 2 days later, a letter arrived. It wasn't sent to her home, but to her gallery, forwarded by the owner. It had been hand-delivered. The handwriting was Jonathan's. Her first instinct was to burn it. Instead, she waited until Michael was asleep, poured a glass of wine, and with a deep breath she opened it. Chloe, it began. I don't have the right to ask for anything, least of all your forgiveness. Prison does one of 2 things to a man. It makes him harder, or it breaks him down to his foundations. I was broken. I spent 3 years with nothing but time to see the man I was. A monster of ego and insecurity. The things I did to you, to our unborn child. They are an evil I will carry for the rest of my days. I am not writing to ask for a second chance. I am not writing to ask for money. I saw you the other day. With him. Michael. He is beautiful. He looks happy. He looks like you. I am writing to ask for an impossible thing. Not now, and maybe not ever. But for the hope that one day when he is old enough to understand, you might allow me 5 minutes to look my son in the eye and tell him I am sorry. Not to be his father, but to simply be the man who admits he failed him. It is all I have left to live for. If your answer is no, I will accept it, and you will never hear from me again. Jonathan. Chloe read the letter twice, then a 3rd time, the words blurring. This was the one thing she had never prepared for. Not a threat, but a plea. Not a monster, but a man drowning in the consequences of his own actions. She thought for a long time, her heart a confusing mix of old pain and a strange, unexpected flicker of pity. She walked into Michael's room and watched him sleep, his face a picture of perfect innocence. Her duty was to him, to protect that innocence. But was it protection to erase a part of his story, or to give him the tools to understand it one day. The next day, she wrote a short reply. She sent it via Robert Chen to ensure there was no direct contact. Jonathan, my only priority is Michael's well-being. Your past actions proved you were a threat to that. The future is unwritten. If you wish for any kind of hope, it will not be earned with words, but with a life of quiet, consistent amends. Become a man my son could one day meet without being harmed by the encounter. Find a purpose that is not centered on yourself. Stay away from us. Do not try to contact us again. My godfather's associates will be watching. If you can live a life of integrity, for years to come, if you can prove that your change is real and not a performance, then perhaps when Michael is a man and can choose for himself, a conversation may be possible. The choice and the work is yours. Chloe. As she gave the letter to be sent, a profound sense of finality washed over her. She had not offered forgiveness. She had offered a difficult, narrow path toward a distant possibility of redemption, a path that kept her and her son completely safe. She had faced the ghost of her past, not with fear or anger, but with the calm, unwavering authority of a queen defending her realm. Jonathan Davenport no longer held any power over her. The echo of his name was just that, a faint sound from a world away, powerless to disturb the beautiful, vibrant world she had built with her own 2 hands. Her canvas was vast, and her future was her own masterpiece to create. Chloe's journey from the cold steps of a mansion to the warm light of her own art studio is a powerful reminder that our darkest moments can often lead to our brightest futures. It's a story about the immense difference between wealth and worth, and how the family we find can be stronger than the one we're born into. She was thrown out, broken and alone, but with the help of a guardian she never knew she had, she discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. Her story proves that justice isn't always about revenge. Sometimes the greatest victory is building a beautiful life on the ashes of what was meant to destroy you. If Chloe's story of resilience and triumph moved you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to start over. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable, real-life stories. What part of Chloe's comeback inspired you the most? Let us know in the comments below.